and we, as beneficiaries of the treaty, must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water.
Thank you. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, this evening we don't have much of a structured agenda, so we're moving right back into any items that individuals have interest from the operating budget, motions from the floor, or any items outside of that that may have been in the response report to Councillor Doyle's motion. So we'll go through any of those motions and we'll see how far we get. So does anyone have a motion that they would like to bring to start? Councillor Doyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that that $200,000 of the corporate sick provision reserve 17191 and $300,000 of the corporate severance for frustrated contracts reserve 17206 be used one time in 2025 to reduce the tax by $500,000.
Seconded by Councillor Sakachi. Go ahead, Councillor Doyle.
So essentially, what we'll be doing here is from those two reserves, they seem to be fairly healthy. The book shows 24 million in. There's a group of reserves in there for 24 million. So essentially, we would just be taking a one-time pause on moving the $500,000 over to that reserve to try to get our taxes down a little bit more this year.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I understand that I like the spirit of the motion. Generally, these aren't things I normally support, but I think that there's a lot of challenges in this budget book. I was hoping that potentially that Councillor Doyle would consider a friendly amendment to this motion, that the $200,000 of the corporate sick provision reserve 17191 and $300,000 of the corporate severance for frustrated contracts reserve 17206 be used one time in 2025, or $250,000 transferred to the strategic development reserve to potentially fund future primary care physician incentives, and $250,000 instead of the $500,000 to reduce the task acts. And if the mover is okay with that, I would happy to just comment further.
Councillor Doyle.
Yeah, that works for me.
Go ahead, Councillor Sakachi.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately the previous Monday's meeting we weren't able to get through the entire agenda. And there was a motion for some physician recruitment there. This is a way to balance our current budget, as well as I think that the appetite will be, we'll hope the appetite, will be from council to support the physician incentive. We have put the $85,000 already into the base, so my guess that there is appetite to do so. This is balancing Councillor Doyle's motion to look for cost savings, as well as potentially funding the recruitment, the incentive process. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Mayor Caniff.
Just a clarification, so the 85 we added in would be taken out using this reserve, or we keep the 85 in plus the 250? Just to clarify.
Perhaps I can clarify, Mr. Chair. The 85,000 that we talked about yesterday was the base for the recruitment committee's use, or the recruiter's use. This is the one-time money that we haven't talked about. We ran out of time at the council meeting, and we're coming back to the December 9th meeting to finish the conversation. There's an ask for one-time money as well for incentives for that group for a 3-year period, and this is one-time money for that incentives.
Councillor Sakachi.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I do understand that the decision hasn't been made on the second part of the motion that Councillor Harrigan and myself moved that day. This is just to make that potentially easier for council to support, and that money, there be some money allocated already to that decision. If it doesn't get supported, that money is still in a strategic reserve that we could use in the future for an additional project that will benefit the community.
Councillor McGrail, followed by Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, through you, Chair. That's exactly what my question was, is can we put that in there as we have not talked and voted on that yet. So, thank you.
Councillor McGregor?
Thank you. So if this goes into the incentives, which I like the idea of this, would this fall back to the motion? I think in Councillor Harrigan's motion, it was approximately $20,000 incentive per doctor recruitment coming in. So would that follow the other motion that was previously here, or is this going to be some other designated amount for incentives?
I'll go to Councillor Harrigan for a
Thanks.
response, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciating that we'll be talking kind of the policy about this at our next council meeting. The motion, the second part of the motion actually looked at creating a new reserve for physician recruitment, and that would be funded out of the strategic reserve. And so there's dollars attached to that with the 20,000 per, 25,000 per physician, but I think we can talk about that on our next council meeting. The idea, though, is that our strategic reserve looks like has about 3.9 million in it, right? So this 250 would be added to that, and then once we decide what the total is for that primary care recruitment incentive reserve, we would then move that over in the new creation. So this might be the entirety of it. We might put more in the reserve. We might put less in the reserve. It'll be a conversation on next council.
Thank you.
Councillor Crew?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Gord, I'm just wondering if, I guess I just want to make sure that the money that we are not putting in the corporate sick provision and the corporate severance for frustrated blah, 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 is that reserve healthy enough if we don't put that much money in it this year?
Yes, the short answer. EMT had already in the budget recommended a pause of putting funds into these two reserves for 2025, and we're okay. You know, we always recommend healthy reserves, but we're okay with this coming out. You know, I guess I do have to say, in general, we always caution taking one-time money out of reserves to pay down our tax asks. So you know, I do have to repeat that but so 250,000, we do like using it normally for one-time issues. So transferring it over the strategic reserve on perhaps on the December 9th, there's a decision on the physician incentive reserve. That's one-time money as well. That was for a period of 3 years was the discussion. And so one-time money going over to another pot for potential one-time use, totally fine with that.
Doesn't create a hole.
The other 250 is buying down the deficit, which means you have further to go up to get the base funding for next year, but that's the will of council tonight.
Okay. So, all right. But you're okay with this? We're going to be okay? But we will have to make up that 250,000 next year.
Correct.
So we start out already needing 250,000 next year, just so you know.
Thank you, Budget Chair. So just to the mover of the motion, I'm a little concerned about the clarity of it because I think the point is, well, I think it should be one of two things, either 250,000 transferred to the Strategic Development Reserve, period, or saying to potentially fund future primary care family physician incentives. My point being, if you read this, if you're you know, somebody involved in the committee, if you read this, it certainly sounds like council has already approved 250,000, and I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is that the money be put aside and perhaps can be used next time you have a council meeting. So I would suggest either ending it at the word reserve, or if you like to say potentially fund future primary care, one or the other. But I think the problem is this is contrary to the motion that, I shouldn't say contrary, but it's confusing in comparison to the motion that's coming forward at the next council meeting.
I mean, that was the spirit of it, understanding. That's why I did want to follow up when I indicated that I know that decision hasn't been made. The hope was when Councillor Harrigan and myself to work on the motion that, as mentioned, it was already going to be passed, and there would have been potentially a different reserve a different name to a reserve, but we can't transfer the money into a reserve that doesn't exist yet. So if this, yeah, so I'm okay with the potential, understanding that council's will, they might decide not to do so, and if not, ultimately, if, you know, my understanding what Councilor Doyle's doing here, ultimately, it would have been beneficial probably to do all into one time, so it was, so basically we were utilizing the 420,000, but understanding the spirit of the motion and him wanting to reduce the taxes this year, I think it's a fair kind of meeting halfway, that we are still able to allocate at least almost, you know, over half of the money, and still reducing the tax. And I think that it's the spirit of Councilor Doyle's motion, not to speak for him, and this kind of identifies two different aspects that we can do. It's just in my humble opinion.
Just before I go to Councilor McGrail, understanding your question, Councilor Crew, and your concern between the two items. For me, I would like to see this split into the 250 transfer to the strategic reserve and the 250 to reduce the tax ask, because they're two kind of separate things, and I think there might be some people that I think would support one but not the other, and I wouldn't want to impact one of them by not splitting it out. So I'd prefer that we split this out so we can vote on them separately. Councilor McGrail, oh, that's what you're going to ask? Oh, there you go. So just for clarity to Gord, the $250,000 to reduce the tax ask, what percent impact does that have on tax increase?
0.12%.
Okay, 0.12. So is it fair to say that regardless of where you take that $250,000, that one-time money from, functionally what we're doing is reducing that tax increase by 0.12% this year, and then just moving that 0.12% to next year?
Yes, because as you come down lower this year, it's just that much further to get up to that same level next year.
Yeah, and I think it's just important that we know that that's what we're voting on. You know, we've looked at these motions kind of year after year to the same effect. Occasionally we've done it, sometimes we haven't. Sometimes we've done it for a certain amount, and sometimes we settle for lower amounts. So I think it's just important that we know that functionally that's what we're doing. So it is certainly one-time money that's available. We've heard the reserves are healthy, they can support that. Certainly transferring some to the strategic reserve to potentially help with this program we know we're going to have to fund with one-time money, I think is a good idea. I think the second part is maybe something we should be more cautious about, but still, you know, certainly something we can entertain. So once we get those separated, any other questions or comments on this one? Oh, Councillor Scott, you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry, Mr. Quinton, can you just make sure so all council is just, so we're understanding, though, that part, not the whole thing isn't going to be required to come for additional funds. So if we do fund just the one-time component, there's not going to be any challenges in the next year for for a part of it. I don't want everybody to view the comments of the chair, which I respect, as similar for both A and B of the motion, or 1 and 2 of the motion.
Absolutely correct. We encourage, the physician idea was for one-time money for a 3-year period, and then perhaps the next council will decide again whether they need to put more money into it. So using one out, we are saying that these two reserves had been built up a little bit higher than they need to be. We're okay with that $500,000 coming out of it. Moving on that one-time money for a one-time purpose, absolutely agree with. And it's part B of the motion. I think you mentioned splitting the motions. The part B of the motion of taking $250,000 from the reserve to lower the taxes by 0.12, it does help this year's taxes. I totally understand that. It's just that you now have to get back up to that, what your base of what you were going to charge next year. You now have that much farther to go. And but that's a council decision.
So we'll just get that separated, and if anyone else has a last moment light bulb, we'll recognize their hand as well.
This is just gonna take a couple minutes for Meredith. Really, it's taking 200,000 from the corporate sick and 50,000 from the corporate severance and transferring to the strategic development reserve, and then taking 250,000 from the corporate severance reserve to reduce the tax ask.
Councillor Story?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I was just looking at those. Did we also take money out of either of those yesterday as well? Was that there was 6 reserve accounts we looked at yesterday for one of my questions. Was that one of them?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. So both of those reserves were part of the one-time pause of those 6 reserves. That's correct.
So we paused putting into them yesterday, and now we're taking more out of them today, just to be clear.
So administration's recommendation was to pause the transfers to those reserves. Through further analysis, Ms. Hoffman did determine that she could give up another 500,000 as part of the response to Councillor Doyle's report or motion, and that's where this came from.
And this is in addition to that?
This is in addition to the one-year pause, correct?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think this looks accurate to what we were asking for. So any other questions, Mayor Ganiff?
Just to clarify, so if we support 1 and don't support 2, where does the 250, does it go back into the reserve? Does it go into
Stays in
cyberspace?
that reserve.
Okay, thank you.
And you could still choose to move it somewhere else with the next motion, yeah. Any other questions? So we'll vote on number 1 first, so that's the movement of $250,000 to the future primary care family physicians incentives. So seeing no further questions, I'll call the vote.
Councillor Bondi?
Yes.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-2.
And seeing no further questions, I'll call the vote on item 2.
Councillor Bondi?
Yes.
All votes are in. Motion passes 10-8.
Okay. Any other motions, questions from the floor? Gord or Steve, what are we at right now?
Sorry.
4.99.
4.99. Councillor Jubenville?
Thank you, Chair. I move that $1,025,500 total of one-time funds from a combination of the following reserves: the investment fluctuation, 17270, facility replacement, 17389, life AMP buildings, 17766, and senior service WSIB, 17303, be used to reduce the task ask in 2025. Looking at these, they all seem like healthy reserves, and it would amount to about $256,375 out of each of the reserves, which wouldn't be a huge impact to them, and it would benefit our taxpayers by reducing it by another 0.5%. And perhaps Gord could just add in on how it would affect these 4 different individual reserves, if you could do that.
We just
That
need a
would be great.
seconder first. Councillor Doyle?
Thanks. I think you're requesting me to walk you through each of those 4 reserves and just sort of educate council on each of the reserves and what they're for and where their balance is. If you're following along, the reserve section, I'll start with the senior WSIB reserve on page 117. It's showing a balance of just over $1 million. What WSIB reserves are for is we generally a long-term care home is a dangerous place to work. Lots of I think the most common injury is by lifting patients, but there's other you got sharp needles and lots of things can happen in a long-term care home that could cause injury. We do as a corporation here, we pay into WSIB. This is to handle any extreme charges that come out when somebody's disabled for a long time. Sometimes we have to draw into reserves. And so that's what this reserve is there. It's built up over time, and currently with $1 million. In a way, it's an insurance policy above if we need to top up because of a serious injury. Investment fluctuations on the next page, 118. So this is relatively new. We started this, 2 or 3 years ago? And where we've significantly got into, in an effort to help our budget process, we significantly got into investing our reserve funds in a more aggressive way. So historically, the way most municipalities operate and how Chatham-Kent operated up until 2020 when we started this program is that you invest in your bank account, which we do have a very good banking agreement. It pays very, very well interest, but you invest in your bank account or GICs. We've moved it to quite a bit more aggressive program. And by doing that, in the multi-year budget, we were able to add $6 million more in 2024 base money. And that's $6 million each year from 2024 to 2027. So $24 million more investment income is in this budget than what was in the 2023 budget. With that more aggressive posture, though, we're taking on more risks. We have zero risk to our principal. They're all principal-backed notes that have zero risk to the downside. But they do have risk of coming in at zero some year if we have a bad economic year. So with that report, which we brought to council to authorize us to be more aggressive, we also recommended the creation of a reserve to handle the ups and downs. Same as your investment portfolio at home, if you invest in your RSP in the stock market, you can have good years and you can have bad years. We're guaranteed never to have anything below zero, which better than your RSP perhaps, but what if we have a bad year? So how much are we at risk? Our interest in the budget, it's $9 million of our revenues, non-tax revenues, is interest income in our budget. So having a $5.8 million in reserve net now, that's current balance, is having, what was that, about 2/3 of a year, of a bad year covered. We know in general rates are on their way down. Like we've had for having a positive cash balance and very little debt. We've had a couple good years here of revenues coming in. What if we did have well, we mentioned even Trump and policies and rural economics. What if we had a couple bad years of investor income and only brought in $5 million a year instead of $9 million? Well, we need $8 million for that shortfall. The first $5.8 million would come from this reserve. So just not arguing against it. It's just the history. It's the risk that's there. And then we get into the two building reserves. So on page 123 is the first one. The life cycle, it says life amp buildings, shows forecasted at the end of 2027, the multi-year, about $7.7 million. I don't know if I need to get into this tonight, so I'll just do it at a high level, but if you want more details, we can get into it. But in the CK Hub proposal, or equally, if we were to fix up this building, so I don't want to tie it to that project, but because in either options that were shown in that Schedule C of the report back in October, $6 million is funds that we haven't spent on this building over the last 7, 8, 9 years that we've saved up. So of the 7.7 million, 6 million's from us not repairing this building for the last few years. So we've committed it in that project, whether it's fixing up this building or the CK Hub, we've committed spending that money with whatever council decides in 2025, whatever direction we're headed. And then the last reserve is on page 126. It's a facility replacement reserve. This was a long-term strategic planning discussion we had with council beginning in 2015, where we started putting away funds every year for some new facility. We have never named a facility. Council has not built a new facility. Our last new facility was 2013 with the Bradley Center. So this has been building up. It's projected to have a balance of $9.22 million at the end of 2027. In that, whether it's renovating this building or the CK Hub, either one, we've committed $9 million coming out of this fund to fund that project as well. So in general, again, you can take $1 million. Well, this is 0.5%, $1,025,000, to buy down this year's budget 0.5%. It will mean that you have a higher percentage to go back up to for next year. But it's really a council decision on do you keep it in the bank for what is upcoming? It's risk, right? On every one of those things that I went through. There's risk involved, but it's really in council's hands on where you want to take it.
Okay, thank you, Gord. So just to clarify, I mean, all of these reserves, we are not necessarily dipping into them. They're there, in case of the day comes, the rainy day. These are all rainy day reserves for the most part. Is that fair to say?
Correct. Each one of them has risk. Like, for example, if you continue not to fix up this building, you wouldn't spend, eventually the doors will be locked because we won't be safely able to come in it. But if you don't fix up the buildings, if the council wants to direct us not to fix, like, I know you're only taking $250,000 out of each approximately. It's spread over the 4 reserves, but so we're not talking draining the reserves. There's still a balance there, but the 2 building reserves are waiting for a council decision on either this building or a CK Hub. We have risks on the investment income, a real risk with the way interest rates are projected to drop, and then the WSIB is you know, is like insurance on major issues there.
Councillor Harrigan?
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that some of these reserves are quite large, but I actually am more focused on what it does to our tax revenues in future years. So would this amount be, can you tell me how much of a % decrease taking this out of reserves and applying it to reduce the tax ask? It's hard to say, in 2025?
So this would amount to a 0.5% decrease.
And then, but we would basically kind of, again, it's that like taking savings to pay the bills kind of process. So what does this mean for next year? Because we've already done a little bit of this in the budget so far this year.
If this were to pass along with the previous motion of the 250,000 and the one-time pause that was already in the budget, you're adding about, next year, we're adding about 1.9% that we'd have to come up with.
So then already, whatever we start with, this adds almost 2% to next year, which just makes our jobs next year that much more challenging. And I think when we're trying to make these decisions, right, obviously we hear it during budget season about the need to reduce taxes, but we've also seen what happens when the community sees what that first number looks like, right? And when that number is a large number, by doing this, we're adding almost 2% to whatever that number is to start next year. We're kind of back at square one again. And so I think the question that we have to consider while we're trying to be creative with tax cuts, I think we want to think more strategically about service reductions, operational cuts, if that's the direction that we want to go, versus taking things out of our reserves and offsetting the tax revenue, because it really is just kicking the problem down the road. And with the multi-year budget, we can already see that 26 and 27, they're not starting at 2% and 3%, right? They're not going to be palatable starting places just with everything that we've had going on. So I would just, and again, in a similar vein, I appreciate Councillor Jubenville kind of looking under every stone to try to make this an affordable budget. But the question is if we're sitting at 4.99 and then it moves down to 4.49, how much of a difference is that felt by individuals versus next year when they have to pay whatever that's going to be plus 1.9? So, I just want to caution how this looks, right? It's often celebrated in the moment, but then we could pay dearly for it in future budget years.
Councillor Story?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just first of all, a question about the motion. I don't know if it's an amendment or a request, but would it be possible to split them all out with dollar amounts?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
Thank you. Thank you. That would be helpful to see. Gord, if I'm looking on page 38 correctly, our projected tax levy percentage increase from rates as of right now would be 8.62% based on the 2020, the multi-year budget.
Not as of right now, because that doesn't take into account all of the decisions that have been made already, which also changes 1%, but primarily these one-time buy-downs, it does not take into account.
Right, and it doesn't include necessarily what we vote to spend or what we must spend next year, potentially.
Right, so it didn't, when we published it first, the 8.62 didn't take into account the OMPF funding that we received in 2025, or we will receive for 2025, which changes the 1%. But the bigger part is the one-time motions, for example, the 250 that was just approved, those are increasing that 8.62 next year already.
Right. Okay. And the general approach to reserves is that I think this is my third budget as a councillor. We look to them every year to remove from, to mitigate tax increases, and we have to replenish them, correct? Or we should replenish them?
It depends on the reserve. You don't always need to replenish them. The bigger part is that if you buy down base budget with one-time money, you then have to add that base budget again next year because you don't have it anymore. So it's not necessarily that you're replenishing the reserves. Some you should, that's
Right.
correct, but not all.
Are the reserves that we have taken from so far in this budget session ones we must replenish?
So far, the ones that we've taken from, those had healthy balances beyond what we thought was a reasonable amount that we needed. So those are not ones that require replenishment. If you were to look at this, this one here, this motion as it stands, to Gord's point, like Lifeham buildings, that is the one that we use to fix up our buildings. So it's either we need to reduce the service level to those buildings, or we need to replenish those funds in order to be able to maintain that current service level.
Okay, thank you. And then I think the last question, it would be I appreciate the explanation of the investment fluctuation fund. That's a new fund that council directed you to create after you presented us with the more risk-heavy recommendation. So what did we do before that fund? Because we were obviously investing. We just took a slightly more, I don't know if risk-friendly is the word, but obviously we've been investing since before we had that reserve fund. So what was our approach before then?
Yeah, so a few things. You remember that Chatham-Kent came into existence with, I think it was about $6 million of working capital, and everything else was given back to the former townships, and that's what we started with, other than a few specific reserves. So the amount of interest income in the early days of Chatham-Kent, we were talking about $500,000 of interest income total. Now we're talking about $9 million a year of interest income.
Did you say 90?
Not nine, just nine.
Thank you.
$9 million of interest income on our reserves that we use to offset as part of it's budgeted as $9 million of interest income. So our risk is, it's multiplied into yes, we are actually talking about millions of dollars, and an interest cut from 5% to 2.5%. If that was our entire investment portfolio, like that's a $4.5 million cut right there, and that's sort of what we're seeing as I'm not saying we're going back to the low interest rates of a couple years ago, but we've already moved down 1% already, and I think we're headed down another % over the next year. So I think we're fine for our 2024. We just had the August variance. We're fine for 2024s. It's getting a little bit riskier towards the end of 2025, and I would say even more riskier in 26 and 27. The further that we get. You also remember, with 1 year budgets, we were just looking 12 months in advance. Now we're looking 4 years in advance. So, but I think it's mainly because we're talking about, like, when we talk about having, the August variance was a $2 million deficit, which was bad enough. But if you add $4 million swings of interest fluctuations into it too, and if we had a $6 million deficit in 2025, that'd mean I'd have to drain your strategic reserve, I guess. If we didn't have these other, we'd have to find another reserve, a bridge reserve, whatever, pick whatever reserve you want. We'd have to take it for somewhere because we have to balance at year end. So it's just it's risk mitigation is where it really comes down to.
And that's mainly because of the lower interest rates. Is that right?
Yeah. Now, keep in mind, we know only part of our funds are just our base interest rates. We do aggressively invest to try to mitigate all those concerns, and I really hope we have 7-8% returns for each year for the next 5 years, and I'll be telling you that we have surplus funds of a couple million a year when we get to year end, right? Like that, it can go that way too. That's how these reserves were built up, by the way, is particularly before we really increased the budget in 2024. We built up funds from 2022 and 23 that went into that reserve, and that's how we have that there existing.
Thank you. And I agree with Councillor Harrigan. I know it's every councillor does their best to try and find as many savings as possible for the taxpayer, and so it's a fine balance on how that looks. Thank you.
Councillor Story, just for clarity, when you want these broken out, do you want them like voted on separately, each of those reserves?
I think I would prefer that if possible, and I was hoping to have the,
With the amounts on each one?
yes, please, with the
Oh,
amount
yeah, sorry, there.
remaining.
Okay.
Is it possible to have the remaining amount?
Like you want the
200
remaining on the motion, or just like for clarity, how much is remaining in each one?
in each fund? For example, if it's 256,000 from a $5 million reserve, it's a
okay.
little different than 256,000 from a 500,000 reserve. Is that, I mean, if that's a huge issue,
We have some
Just
more
to get a better
comments
sense.
to go through, so
Sure.
I think we can
Thank
work
you.
on that a little bit.
Well, I just want to be careful on,
What ends up in there?
you have
right?
commitment. If I use the facility replacement reserve as an example, there's 9.3 million in the reserve.
Yep.
So 250,000 out of 9.3 million. Okay. But does council, I think we're in the middle ground here, land here where council hasn't made a decision to fix up this building, to fix up, to invest in a CK hub. And by the way, like the other building reserve, the life cycle buildings, it's actually for any of our buildings. I used the 6 million as an example because it's been committed, but it's committed in a report that hasn't got to final resolution yet. So my point is, in the facility replacement, do you want to say that's out of 9.3 million or just 300,000 that's left?
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe rather than putting that up on the screen, I don't know if we can.
I'll verbally just tell you that.
Yeah, sure.
It's 9. $7.7 million for the life cycle building. Sorry. 5.8 million for fluctuation and $1 million for the WSIB.
Okay. So I have Councillor Crew, followed by Mayor Caniff.
Thank you. Councillor Harrigan pretty much said everything I was going to say, and I think that we need to realize that this is going to, we're already starting at 1.9, already on top of what we're already forecasted to do next year, and I don't want to repeat everything, but this is very important. If we don't fund these reserves, and I don't know how many times I heard, well, whose fault is it that you didn't fix up the Civic Center? Well, it's sucking and blowing here. So we need to fund these reserves. We can't fund our tax base and needs that aren't one time. And if we were buying tables for everybody, or desks, or laptops, that's where this use of a reserve is a good use, because it's a one-time thing. But like I said to Councillor Doyle, if we keep funding every year out of the reserves to do that 5%, 4%, get it down a little bit, next year, I remember one time we started out at 3% because we made a hole from last year in our base budget, because that's where it comes from. It's like trying to pay your hydro bill and your rent or your mortgage out of your income tax every year. Well, it's only going to last so long, and then you have to go into your savings, which is only going to last so long. This is not a good use. I understand because I used to do this. I think the first 3 budgets, I did this. Look through the reserves, what can we fund out of there, trying to get that tax down, because I was new and I knew I needed to make that happen. And so I tried that a lot, and I learned a lot that this is not good budgeting. So I'm not that I don't think that it's a good use, good try, but I can't support us setting our future up. We have a responsibility, not just for today and this tax base, and I think we all know that we're looking at the future, and the economics of tomorrow, we don't know what it's going to be. So I really encourage you all to not support this. Not that I don't want to support Councillor Jubenville's motion, but it's just not a good use of these reserves.
Mayor Caniff?
Ditto to Councillor Crew and Councillor Harrigan. I'll save anymore. I could say the same thing in a different way, but I will stop there.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you very much. I guess my first question is this is our third budget, right? So that means next budget is our
Fourth, I believe, comes after three.
fourth before a
Election.
election. Yeah, that'll be fun. And I say that because we're acting like this is our election budget, and it's not. So if you think this is difficult and you want to be portrayed as a tax fighter, the next one is where you want to be portrayed as a tax fighter. I appreciate, Gord, you pointing out how much money we have in each reserve there. Against what sort of liabilities?
Actually, I think, particularly the two building ones, I know I focused on the decisions that we have to make for civic centers, but we have 115 buildings. Edward, could you perhaps talk on our asset management plan and how on the building ones, and sort of where we're funded and sort of the outlook for all our buildings, I guess.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Budget Chair. In terms of our overall asset management plan, Council may recall, I think it was just only a couple of weeks ago actually that we came here and we identified for the non-core assets that we have over a $400 million gap. So when we look at the building life cycle AMP reserve there, part of that gap is to really help fund the replacement of those buildings. So to say that, we have, I think it's $9 million, Gord said, we have in there, that is not sufficient. You have a gap. That's what we have in reserve, but we have much more needs in terms of buildings than $9 million. This year in the budget, you'll see that we have a fairly detailed plan of what we're going to do in terms of building work in the next, in 2025. But as we go further into 26 and 27, we undertook building condition assessments for all of our facilities, and we'll be coming back to council with a more refined plan for 26 and 27 in terms of buildings. I can guarantee you that that $9 million is not enough money in the building reserve to deal with all of those facilities that will be coming back.
Okay. I mean, not a big surprise there. I think we all knew it, but I think sometimes it's good to talk about it. I mean, this idea, as Councillor Crew pointed out, is certainly a tenacious one. It comes up all the time, but we have to be cognizant of, I mean, I get it. People are people. When we're at home, we've got a big pile of money because we're saving for retirement, but it sure is nice to pull it out to buy that new bass boat, because I really want that bass boat. And my wife really wants that kitchen. And my financial advisor will say, well, you can do it, right? But we all know you really can't do it because you've got to save. And we have to save for these things that are clearly coming down the pipeline. And the only other thing that I noticed, and I mean, I want to just make mention of it there, is that last line, like our forecasted available reserves there sitting at 90 million, but in 3 years, we're already down to, we'll be down forecasted to 84 million. So we are already pulling out more money out of reserves than we are putting into reserves for those big projects that we need to pay for, because we have been saving. And I think it's only prudent that we continue to do that saving. So thank you.
Councillor McGrail?
Thank you, through the chair. I appreciate everyone's, our debates, but let's call this question.
I do have a speakers list that I feel like I should entertain, because I hope this might be our last motion. So I've got only 4 more. I won't recognize another hand out of respect for that motion. So we'll go to Sakachi, Hall, Bondi, and then that's it on the speakers list. And maybe myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one thing, I think that for one, I'll be on record saying I think we have a fantastic budget team. But I think one thing that would be helpful as a member of council as well in the future, and I know that it would be very, very challenging to do so, but I often hear, even when I first started, the words healthy reserve. And I think it's very challenging for even a new counselor, a veteran counselor, somebody who's been here far much longer than me, to say what is actually healthy. Now, I do appreciate the explanation of impacts or the 10% or greater. That is very, very healthy. But for these ones here, these 4 ones here, can I just understand the matrix of how these have been identified as healthy, just so I can understand a little bit better what we're actually voting on?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. As it relates to sort of what is the desired reserve balance, that is something that the budget and performance team will be working on with finance and the departments in the next year or two in conjunction with the asset management plan, because that is an important measure. What should that reserve be? Speaking on the investment fluctuation reserve, when meeting with our financial, our investment team, Wood Gundy, we really should be having about 18 months to 2 years worth of investment income in that reserve. So as Gord mentioned, our reserve balance, or our annual budget is $9 million. So that means based on the more aggressive approach we took to budgeting, we should have anywhere between 14 and 18 million in that reserve, and that would be the ideal balance. The facility replacement life amp building, I think, as both Gordon and Edward have mentioned, those are about 40% funded. Like we're not funded, so as Edward's team is working on the asset management plan, and it comes back to council in the future, you will see what those desired balances are. And as relates to the WSIB reserve, I don't know, Gord, if you have any comments on this. I don't have an accurate amount on what that balance should be at this point, but it is something that we would be working on as part of that exercise in the next year or two.
So I appreciate the long response, but would you, so if I can summarize, you don't think these are the a perfect storm would not be to take the money from, and I understand that there's not a perfect storm right now with the challenges that we're facing in the community, but so some of these budgets, some of these reserves wouldn't technically, to your standards, be, I guess, significant or overabundance?
I believe that all of these reserves are currently underfunded.
Underfunded. That's where I was going to. And thank you. So, because I did hear that they were healthy, and I think that was important to touch on that. Secondly, Councillor Doyle made a motion that that tasked administration look at savings and all that. Was your, your reserve funding, was that something that you went over when you were doing the process? Did you guys look at all the reserves, and if there was any that could be reduced by 7.5% or pause? And the reason why I ask is I know on the report there was actually some recommendations to potentially pause some of the transfers. Was these other ones looked at as well when we were going through that process?
Through the budget process, all reserves were looked at and what the appropriate balance was and if we could pause those. And that's really where the $1.7 million in reserve pauses came from as part of administration's recommendation within the budget. As relates to those ones that came as part of the 7.5%, there was a couple on there that were already included in the budget that we paused. And then the ones that we've dealt with earlier tonight, which we're able to have a little bit further of a reduction in them. But as part of the budget process, all reserves are looked at to determine if they have an appropriate balance. And if it's over, that's when the recommendation came to pause the transfer.
And none of those 4 made it on the list, correct?
That is correct.
Correct. And then just in closing, I know Mr. Soldo did indicate a couple things regarding the asset management plan. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here in budget, but I do also know that his team is taking on a big exercise right now in the recreational master plan. And I think it's really, and this is maybe I'm incorrect, but could the potential of number 2, the facility replacement, would that reserve be utilized? I'm just guessing, maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll buy everybody dinner, that it's going to say that we don't need a new arena. But if it does come up that we do a new arena, is that a reserve that we would be tapping into? Is that a reserve we could be possibly tapping into?
Absolutely. and it has a base funding going into it, into the future as well. Like I mentioned, in 2015 is when we started. The goal is to have 1% a year. So now it's 2,051,000 is what represents 1% being put away in a reserve, because we know we have 115 buildings or whatever the number is, and the 10 arenas, and a lot of buildings at 60 to 100 years old. Not that many under 50. Even in our financial information return goes to the province, and with our asset management plans, and we get we talk about the BMA study, often, and we often point to the one tax page, but it's a 500-page book, and it has reserve comparisons and asset age comparisons. We're way over the Southwestern Ontario average of how old our assets are. No, I guess not all of our assets. So the wave of financial costs is coming. That's exactly what the asset management plan over the next years to really demonstrate it even clearer to council and the public where we're really at. I'll say it every time I get. We need help from the upper levels of governments. It doesn't all have to come from the taxpayer, but the property taxpayer. It needs to be flowing from other sources of income from upper levels. But
Yeah, thank you, Gordon. Just a comment and then maybe one last quick question. It's funny, actually, just prior to the meeting, the chair and myself were just briefly discussing, we were just talking about, arenas and the escalation of costs and just in general inflationary stuff. And, I think it was my first year, we sat around talking about an arena at potentially, I think it was like $27 million. Now we're seeing the same types of arenas being built at $50, $60 million, if not more when you're talking about twin pad arenas and large arenas, right? They're 80 plus million. So my question, and maybe it's twofold to Mr. Quinton and to Mr. Soldo, if we pause these reserves and then we decide to move forward with a project, how are we going to fund that money if we're now short? The money's no longer in the reserve. Are we going to? It's essentially kind of twofold that we're kind of coming after the base for more money, and we don't have enough money there in the bank essentially for the project. Correct?
Yeah, turning into our arena discussion. But if you needed $100 million for any, by the way, I think we're getting probably. I think Sudbury, I think I was just talking about it to the chair here. I think it was close to $200 million, but it was perhaps a little bit bigger than what we need here. Like the cost, where we were talking about a $25 million facility a couple decades ago. And so where's the funding coming from? Of course, we're asking upper levels of government for help. Whether there's applications available or however it would come. But when it gets to our own dollars, yeah, there would be naming rights and a few sources of income perhaps. But it comes down to how much do you have in the bank already that you put aside for it? And that's what we're talking about here. And how big is the debenture that you now have to spread, a $75 million debenture, for example, that you're going to spread the cost over 20 years, yes, but the principal and interest every year of those 20 years, it will be significant. So you would need that much larger of tax increase in the future to fund that if you can't absorb it in what we already have. And the good thing is on this facility replacement, we already have this 1% a year going in. So the $2,051,000 already going in. Right now it's feeding up a bank for one-time uses, whatever council decides to use it on. But it's also will be there to help with that debenture payment for our new facilities going forward as well.
Thanks, and likewise as some of the comments, I appreciate the Councillor Jubenville's motion because I think that, I don't fault anybody for making a valid effort to try to reduce tax savings. I think it's important to look at things at all cost for sure. It's just, there's a way we could do this with not starting at 2% next year. This would be something I would actually support, which normally I wouldn't do. Just in closing, Gord, is there one of those that you feel that would be less impacted if it was supported? Is there one from a, because I don't know how why these reserves out of all the ones were picked. So if there's one, is there one that, you know, that you can say with certainty that would be less impacted? Because I would probably support one of them if there was no impact, but or low impact, but not just without having any knowledge of what's we're voting on technically.
No, I can't make a recommendation, no.
Thanks.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to repeat some of the comments, but definitely appreciate Councillor Crew, Councillor Harrigan, Councillor Thompson, their comments tonight. I think you know, they spoke some very wise words this evening, and combined with Gordon and Steve and the budget team's comments, I think that makes it clear of what you know, how council should vote on this at this point. Also, you know, appreciate Councillor Jubenville's motion here to, you know, to try to lower the tax impact for this year. But you know, I think, you know, I've been to a few budgets, I guess not as many as some people around the table, but oftentimes towards the end of our deliberations, we kind of get some Hail Marys that, you know, I think we've heard why, you know, why we shouldn't go in this direction. But I guess just to bring it back to before this motion, we heard about what the tax increase is right now. And I just wanted to ask, I think we always hear this like towards the end of deliberations, that sort of thing, but we're at a 4.99% tax increase right now. Can you just tell me how does that impact an average citizen in Chatham-Kent? And what is that, or an average household? I forget exactly how you mentioned
It might take
usually.
a second, but we'll get that for you.
Thanks.
So while we wait for that to come back, I'll go to Councillor Bondi's comments. Yeah. Councillor Bondi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as Councillor Hall said, yeah, we seem to end up going towards reserves at the end of pretty much every budget I've sat through. And just a different perspective. If we were to take some money out of reserves to provide some tax relief this year, a lot of what I'm hearing is, well, that has to be replenished next year because we're, you know, stealing from the bank to pay the gas bill or whatever the scenario. But think of it this way. We came in to this budget at 9 and change. We're down to 499. So we provide some relief this year by using reserves. That doesn't mean that that's automatically a tax increase next year. We'll have to be challenged to do our job next year and find cuts like the dust suppression thing. There was a cut that, you know, I'm sure, well, I know I didn't see it coming until this budget session started. So by taking from reserves, it's not necessarily a tax increase for next year. It makes it more of a challenge next year. But I've been to 15 of these, and we've always started high, and we've never gone higher or landed there. That's why we sit around, well, it used to be for 3 weeks, and we chip away at it. So I'll support this because it's providing relief this year, makes for more of a challenge next year. And that's okay with me. And that's what I think we can do. And I don't like the idea that when we say by taking from reserves, we're automatically adding 2% to next year's tax increase. Well, we're adding 2% to the projected tax increase. This year's projected tax increase was 9 and change. I should know it because we all heard about it a billion times. But we're at 499 now. So it adds to the projection. It doesn't actually add necessarily to next year's tax increase. So that's just a comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bondi. I have a few comments. I agree. We do see motions like these well-intentioned at the end of most budget processes, and I certainly understand it. And I do remember one from one of my first budgets that I believe was $300,000 from a salt reserve. And I might need to be corrected, but I think it took us 8 years of budgets to figure out the deficit funding in that salt reserve. So I think that was an early lesson that I'll take from these types of motions. And I do think we have two sort of separate discussions going on with a motion like this. We have both the health of these reserves and what they're going to be used for and their importance as one consideration, but also the consideration of just moving expense forward to next year in the budget process. And I know attending a number of online budget open houses, some community town halls, what I've heard from residents is that when they're looking for a reduction in expenses or tax relief, they're talking about organizational efficiencies, they're talking about finding savings. A motion like this isn't finding savings. We're not changing anything that we do. We're not finding savings or efficiencies. We've done that through other motions. Staff have done that through this process. But this isn't about savings. This is a accounting move to move a % increase from this year to next year. And what I haven't heard from anyone from the public is a recommendation to move our tax responsibility this year to next year and kick it down the road. So I think through this process, it is often a learning process. We should debate these things every year. We should review why we have reserves and how they work and what that multi-year impact looks like. So I certainly appreciate these motions coming forward. But I think it's important that we recognize the multi-year impact and don't push the responsibility down the road. And I do think we have an update on that Councillor Hall question for the tax impact.
So to answer Councillor Hall's question, the average, the 4.99% results in a $176 increase on the average house, and that equals $100 per 100,000 of assessment.
Councillor Hall?
Yeah, thank you for that. And maybe too, I don't need the exact figures with this, but just to kind of wrap this my thinking of it up anyway. I appreciate that number and how it impacts each household, the average household. But going back again to our opening budget night, where you guys really talked about, with this budget, we were looking at 3 different, kind of buckets that we were looking at that the increase was going to go to. Can you just talk about that, about where this budget, with the work we've done and all the preparation of the budget, what are those 3 kind of areas that we're going to be, going towards with this increase?
So are you looking for where each of those categories stands now after the recommendation?
I don't need, if you have that handy, I don't want to hold up any time here, but maybe if you can just talk about what those are a little bit.
So we can have it shortly for you, but there's really 3 categories that we broke the budget into. First one being maintain existing services. That there came in below the 2.5% inflation that the Bank of Canada has. The other one is social issues. So that's items such as the cabin project, police falls under there, and any of the homelessness. And then we also have the infrastructure. And that one, it's been cut a fair amount through this budget cycle. That one, we have about $4 million going into it. So it's really to fund the infrastructure, both the inflation on it and then also the new 1.5%. And I think I may have the numbers for you. So the maintain existing services is currently at 1.88. The infrastructure is at 0.76, and the social issues is at 2.35 for a total of 4.99.
Ren, I appreciate that, and I think it was a good time to kind of get that context and where we're at, and keep in mind of what what our budget's going to do and what our work's going to do, and we'll continue to do every Monday night moving forward. So thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we're voting on these separately, so I will call the vote on number 1.
Councillor Bondy?
Yeah, excuse me, yes.
All votes are in. Motion fails 4-18. Sorry, 4-14 adds to 18. Just seeing if you're awake.
And now I'll call the vote on number 2.
Councillor Bondy? All votes are in. Motion passes 3-15.
Fails 3-15?
Yes. I'm going to try.
I'll call the vote on number 3.
Councillor Bondy?
Yes.
All votes are in. Motion fails 3-15.
Third time's a charm. All right. And number 4.
Counselor Bondi?
Yes.
All votes are in. Motion fails 4-14.
Okay. Any other motions, questions, comments? Counselor Harrigan?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I just, in acknowledging that we've had many conversations, and I believe all of the motions that we anticipated have brought to the floor, I would like to move that the Budget Committee adopt the 2025 annual budget update, resulting in a 2025 tax impact of 4.99%.
Moved by Counselor Anderson. Go ahead, Counselor Harrigan.
Great. So I don't have many comments to make, except for perhaps just one of gratitude to first our staff and our finance team for answering questions sometimes on the fly and sometimes in advance. And also to my fellow counselor colleagues, not just for the work that we do and how we respond to questions and concerns, but for how respectful we're able to have dialogue about difficult conversations and giving ourselves and our colleagues the time and space to really understand the budget when it's put in front of us. I feel like, you know, respect and decorum are something that's often taken for granted, so I really appreciated the last couple of nights that we had. And certainly think that there comes a time in budgets, and I'm no expert, but there comes a time when there's this balance between, you know, how much do we want to see a little bit lower of a number where we just chip away at this budget, but then what we're doing is we're putting at risk our priorities, our strategic plan, the needs of our communities. In particular, I think some of our smaller communities or groups who during their deputations have expressed us how important some of those community services are. And so when we look at where we started in the summer, and I think all of us around the horseshoe here were very scared about what that budget would look like, and we look at where we've gotten, I think that we should be really proud of ourselves. So now's a really good time to kind of test the waters and see if this is a budget that we as council would be able to pass.
Counselor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair, and through you. I completely agree and echo everything that Councillor Harrigan has said, and I certainly appreciate all the work that the staff and the Budget Committee and Council has done. I think that, you know, we get to this point where I certainly understand the pressures that we have from constituents to keep taxes low. But I'll just tell a really quick story. My daughter, when she was 3 years old, fell off of the chair, knocked her teeth through her lip. And I told her she had to go to the hospital, and she was screaming and crying. She didn't want to go, didn't want to go, didn't want to go. And even called me a bad mom, right? But literally, it was split right through. So I bring her to the hospital, and she had to get a needle, and she had to get stitches, and she was really, really upset about it. But if I wouldn't have done that, it would have healed, but she would have had a hole there permanently, and any contents in her mouth would just kind of spill out, right? So I say that because we are the parents and the guardians of Chatham-Kent, and we have to make some really tough decisions. And sometimes what that means is we have to make decisions that are going to keep the services and going to keep the future going for where we see things going for Chatham-Kent and what we want to provide for them. And I think that we're at the point where we can start potentially making some pretty poor and irresponsible decisions, especially when it comes to the future of Chatham-Kent. And I think that for that reason, now is a really good time for us to call it. Thanks.
Councillor Jubenville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just also like to say thank you to someone that we forget about all the time, and that's the taxpayer. So they're the end user, and they're the one that will be affected by the decisions that we make. So I think it's prudent that we acknowledge the taxpayer and give thanks to them for supporting what we decide to do here in the council chambers. Thank you.
Councillor Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo everybody's comments. I think every year of this term has been a challenging one financially, and I think we do, listen and take everyone's feedback and input in respectfully, and I really appreciate that as well, because I know there is a variety of opinions on what that should look like, so I appreciate that as well. This is actually just one last question for Gord, I apologize, and Stephen. We do use the analogy of it will cost the average home of $177,000 X number of dollars, and we all know that we're 8 years behind with MPAC, so I don't think any of us know what that $177,000 home is anymore, since that it exists in MPAC, in the magical land of MPAC, but it doesn't really exist anywhere else. So could you just, for when we're communicating with constituents, do we have a general sense of what that would look like for the, I'm not sure who the average taxpayer is anymore, to be honest, and that just give us some communication tools, and maybe that's not always tonight, but in the next couple of days and weeks, as we talk to our constituents, what that looks like. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So the average household is $176,000. That's what the assessed value is. If MPAC, when MPAC does a reassessment and houses, let's say, double or triple, they're all going to double or triple, or if they do, then the impact is still $176 per household. So assessments, reassessments are revenue neutral to municipality. I can't say that enough. We hear all the time that when MPAC does a reassessment, everyone's taxes are going to double. That is not the case. So if everyone's houses triple in value, they would still be paying $176.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate that analogy. I just think it's confusing for folks because we don't know who that is anymore. I understand how the assessment piece works. It's just a challenge because we may not remember what, I might be an average taxpayer. I live in a condo, so it might be lower. Someone living in a larger house might be higher, but it's just, that is still a bit of a wild card. So we're still going to just go with the average person is average taxpayer is $176 per year increase.
The average is about, this increase is $100 per 100,000 assessment. So the best way for someone to tell what their impact would be is look at their tax bill. It's $100 per 100,000. So if they are a $300,000 house, it would be a $300 impact. That's the best way to look at it.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually just got a process question because I think this is our first actual closing budget with strong mayor powers, correct? So beforehand, we used to vote like as a, I just don't know how it, and I very much respect Mayor Caniff in regards to that he wouldn't put something through that the council didn't support, but I was just curious of how this works. Maybe I don't know if it's the clerk or Mr. Quinton can comment on how this works now.
Yeah, so on opening night presentation, I put up a slide on the strong mayor powers, the process. So what this does, this ends council's, like if this were to pass, this ends council's review of the budget. They then hand it back to the mayor, and the mayor can have up to a 10-day period to veto any of the amendments that council made. The mayor, if they want, can shorten that period, that time period, if they are not wishing to make any amendments. But that's the process one, council has finalized, if this motion passes, council has finalized their position and is handing it over to the mayor for a 10-day period of review.
Sorry, I think I didn't ask it properly. So if it passes, I appreciate the beginning. So if this, before we used to pass it in budget committee, and then we would move to open council, and then, so that, I'm just clarifying that second stage is just not, it's not here anymore. I'm just trying to understand that. I understood the beginning, but just that portion.
We'll go to the award-winning clerk.
Thank you. We will still break out of budget committee and we'll go into open, but the motion has been reworded for open, and it now would read that the Chatham-Kent Council adopt the 2025 annual budget update as recommended by the budget committee and end council's budget review, and resulting in a 2025 tax impact of X, and then the strong mayor powers are over to Mayor Caniff to decide if he wants to implement anything. One other motion that we'll have to do in council is what that third recommendation from closed of directing administration to use the reserve, because budget committee can't make the decision on reserves.
Thank you. Award-winning clerk.
Any other comments? Just before, oh, Councillor Doyle, apologies, go ahead.
I just want to say I did have one more motion because I think Harrigan, no, I know, if this doesn't pass, because Councillor Harrigan said she thought we were through all the motions. I did have one more motion that I spoke to the chair about already, that I would be bringing forward if it didn't pass. It would just be a small one for 150,000.
Can you remind me what that was going to be? Because I don't think I have it
one.
here.
So we can still vote on this first. You brought it up first, so we'll vote on this. And then if it doesn't pass, then I would bring that up.
Yeah, I wonder if the mover would withdraw briefly, and we can probably deal with that motion in 5 to 10 minutes.
Yes, I
Okay.
will withdraw to allow Council Doyle to bring his motion. We don't want to cut anybody's ideas off as part of the
Agreed.
budget process.
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Councillor Doyle.
I move that the following transfers to reserve be reduced, resulting in $150,000 base savings in 2025. So that will be one, ITT LifeAmp computer network be reduced by $23,000. So currently, right now, we're putting $523,000 into that reserve. So I would be dropping that from 523 to 500. Two, the ITT LifeAmp copy printing be reduced by $14,000. So currently, right now, we're putting in $64,000 into that reserve, so it would drop to $50,000 just for 2025. Three, ITT LifeAmp server storage be reduced by $55,000. So we are currently putting in $355,000 to that reserve, so that would drop to $300,000 for 2025. And four, the ITT LifeAmp ITT applications be reduced by $58,000, and we're currently putting in $658,000 to that reserve, so we'd still be putting in $600,000. And all of those reserves currently are fairly healthy, and at the end in 2027 look, in my opinion, fairly healthy too. So overall, between all four of those reserves, it would be $150 base savings in 2025. Sorry, $150,000 base savings in 2025.
Yeah, base savings, yeah.
My bad, sorry.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Jumonville? Go ahead, Councillor Doyle.
I had went in and had a meeting with Gord and Michael. I talked about a whole bunch of ideas. This was one of them that Gord, you had said that the reserves for the ITT seemed to be fairly healthy, and you were okay with this. So I just figured again, it's just a way that if we do have a healthy reserve, to put a little bit less in for 1 year, still put a lot more than that we're not putting into the reserve, just to again get some tax savings for 2025.
Councillor Finn?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair. Did we not already approve to not transfer any reserve funding this year?
Not yet, no.
Was that not a line in here? I'm trying to find it, but I thought it said transfer of reserves.
So this is just ITT infrastructure is part of our infrastructure. So overall, how we deal with capital in general and infrastructure, it's the 2024 base before our budget was about $78 million that we transfer into reserve for all these categories, whether it's roads, bridges, buildings, IT infrastructure, all types of things. And then we have the capital budget that draws down on those reserves. So I'm not sure what you're referring to that we're not putting money into reserves, because that's actually the whole process of how we fund our life cycle asset management plan program.
Like I said, I was trying to find the line, but it was a $2 million note in here.
Oh, we did have the pause to
Yeah.
six specific reserves.
Is that not what this would be part of?
No, this has nothing to do with,
Oh, okay.
with those 6 reserves.
I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
this is, sorry, you just said additional this is a base reduction.
Counselor Crew?
Okay, just to clarify, so it looks like what we would be putting into the reserve, we're going to be putting less for this year. Not taking money out, is that correct? This is just reducing what we are going to put in from the tax impact.
So I think I need to describe what the impact is. Our asset management plan has tons of different categories, right? Like roads, bridges, go down the list. IT infrastructure is one of them, and inside IT infrastructure, we have it broken down into, I think there's about 8 in total reserves, and these are 4 that have been identified. We're saying overall, our asset management plan, you know, which we're coming to more details with throughout the 2025 with, is extremely underfunded. Whether it's at 40% funded or 30% funded, well, that's what we're gonna know in June, but it's not good. IT was one of the 19 asset management plans that council just received back in October, showed an annual shortfall of 1.24 million. So we're $1.25 million short already. This motion will make it $1.4 million short a year of where we should be headed to. We need to maintain our assets, all types of assets. We can't let assets go. But as Councillor Doyle said, they have built up a healthy balance, waiting for, because they come in big chunks when they come. I'll give you an example. In 2014, the applications, for example, we replaced our accounting application and put in J.D. Edwards. That was $7 million in 2013, and it was completed over 2013 and 2014. So in today's dollars, we're talking $15 million to replace the accounting system. When do we come to that again? And they don't live forever. We had some serious problems with our previous accounting system that forced our 2013 change. So we have upgrades that might be $1 million here or there along the way, and we just completed one in 2024, our latest upgrade for our accounting system. So those things come along, network switches and servers and machinery, printer copies, storage. You know, the expenses are coming, and this is just a reduction of funding our asset management plan in general. We have many categories, and this is just one of them. I think I'll end it there.
Thank you for that explanation. That's all I had.
Councillor McGrail?
Thank you, through the chair. Gord, any of these 4 reserves, is that money already tagged for something, a project, in any that we're trying to take out?
In the very short term, these reserves are okay. And I think that was the intent of Councillor Doyle's motion, to say we're okay now, but we will have to catch this up. We would have to catch this up. And when we're only at, like I say, 40% funded overall in all our assets, you know, put it another way, we have inflation on our asset management plan that we decide corporately who needs the inflation money most. I probably don't need the inflation right away in IT, but we might need it in storm sewer or somewhere else. And so this is all a funding program of all our assets. This is picking and choosing on one asset that happens to now have a healthy reserve. The bridge reserve, for example, has a healthy balance right now too, but there's there's a wave of bridges coming. And there's a wave of IT work coming too. So this is building up the funds so that we don't have to take IT money from your bridge reserve 5 years down the road when the wave comes.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I had a question, but I think, I guess I did ask Councillor Doyle just now. I just was asking about the actual amounts, kind of why those ones were selected. So I guess just a generalized question to you. If we were to make a motion like this, would it be beneficial to make a motion to reserve or reduce $150,000 in reserves with at least, I guess, some financial insight instead of just picking 4 reserves that I just don't like. I get what you're saying, but like, I mean, I would be more. I'm okay with like that small of a number, but I think it would be better for myself or easier, to support if it was just 150,000 of reserves that you feel that you. Because I just have a hard time us picking what they are, not really knowing with your comments if they are actually healthy or what's okay and what's not okay. But in the premise of it, I mean, $150,000, it's still going to be a 4.99% tax increase. Is that correct with this, or it will be 4.98 now if it's supported?
So 150,000 is 0.07. So this would be to move it to 4.92. These have more than 1 year's worth of dollars in it right now. And like I say, the expenses are coming. Overall, we should be putting in all our IT reserves through the asset management plan that council just received a couple months ago for IT. We should be putting in $1.25 million more in reserves annually than what we're at. So I'm not saying they're healthy. But if you look at the actual balance, you'll see 5 million and some balances. But like I say, you can have a $15 million project coming up as well.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, so these are all going to be last question. Sorry, these are all going to be together, because my calculations was I was doing them separately, like if each one was like the percentage of each one. But I guess if you do them all together, so is that how the motion is together, or it's just all one shot, $150,000 then?
Right now, it's all together.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much. I don't know where the page is. Are these all the ITT reserves we have?
No. No,
Okay.
I can take us through the
No,
binder
no,
if you'd like.
it's fine. Maybe an ITT question. If they had their druthers, would these be the 4 they'd want to pull $150,000 out of?
I think just for clarity, they're also not pulling 150,000 out. They're just, it's
Right,
a base
yes,
budget
pardon
change.
me, you're right, pardon me. If the ITT department had their druthers, would this be where they would find $150,000 in savings?
So just to reiterate, over the next 10 years, this is $1.5 million of reductions because it's 150,000 base permanently. So it's not just, it's cutting the base of what's being transferred. So this is a permanent cut.
See, now Councillor Doyle's done this in the past. He doesn't think so.
This was the base, says base saving.
Oh, yeah, sorry, when we discussed it, it was just supposed to be for one, I read the motion you guys gave me. It was just supposed to be for 2025, so 2026, they all go back to the same numbers.
Oh, okay, then we go on to the previous discussion of one-time money. That would make it a larger increase next year. But yeah, it's still,
Okay.
that's better than,
That's better than 1.5 million. That's
better than base, but as far as IT is concerned.
So we'll need to fix the wording there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because this was just supposed to be meant for.
So I would say that the wording should be changed so that the following transfers to reserve be paused in 2025,
Yes.
resulting in $150,000 reduction to those 4 reserves.
Okay, I do have a couple other
continue on.
Okay. Follow-up question, Councillor Sakachi kind of alluded to it. So the numbers I made were 4.99 was $176,000 to the average homeowner, and I got 4.92 at $173.50. Is that accurate?
Yes, without me.
So we're going to save every household $2.50. My final thought, and I don't know, we've had a lot of conversations about cybersecurity and cyber risk and things such as that. And I hope nobody's watching that's interested in these sorts of things. Tell me that this wouldn't impact our ability to stay safe in the cyber world.
I'm not getting too deep into cyber,
I wouldn't expect you to.
but sometimes cyber ruins equipment.
Okay.
And that means every piece of equipment around this table and then it all has to be replaced at once. And so it depends on depends what gets harmed.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Seeing no other comments, oh, sorry, Councillor Sakachi, go ahead.
I apologize. This is now passing the 100. Now you are looking to replace the 150,000 next year. Are you going to be looking to replace the 100? So you're gonna ask for all this back next year in the next.
So
budget?
the way that motion reads
Now-
is that,
now,
the way it reads now is that transfer is paused for 1 year.
Yep.
So then next year, you got to put 150 back into base budget. So it's pausing the transfer for 1 year.
But are you asking, I got that part, but are you asking, you're gonna ask for the 150 back and then ask for because my guess you would be asking for the percentage that you were this time plus the 150, is that correct or no? Am I wrong?
So we wouldn't be asking for the 150 that you paused this year, but that 150 would come back next year. So they would still be overall, those reserves would be 150,000 less. We wouldn't be asking you to make up that amount, if that's what you're asking.
So functionally, it's not really different than taking $150,000 out of reserve, paying down for a year. Yeah. Okay, seeing no other comments, Councillor Dole, I'll go back to you if you would like.
I'll make it quick. I got nothing to say.
Appreciate it, thank you. With that, I will call the vote.
Councillor Bondi?
Yes.
All votes are in. Motion fails 6-12.
And just before we re-entertain the motion to accept the budget, I will ask one last time to be sure that there's no other motions from the floor. Thank you. So I'll go back to Councillor Harrigan. Thank you for withdrawing that motion temporarily, and I'll go back to you.
Happy to do so, Mr. Chair. So I will move that the Budget Committee adopt the 2025 annual budget update, resulting in a 2025 tax impact of 4.99%.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further comments from those who didn't speak the first time around before we paused? I will just make a few brief comments. So again, I'd like to thank Gordon, Steve, and the budget team, and EMT, and all the administrative staff that have worked over the past year in this process, and certainly appreciate all the public input that we saw on the online forums and through emails and phone calls that we've received as budget committee members. Understanding that this is our first experience with the four-year budget and our first annual update, I appreciate all the patience we had in learning this process together, and I think it has allowed us an opportunity to view this as more of a long-term commitment to the community. And I want to thank all the budget committee members for all the hard work that you've done, for coming prepared, for looking for opportunities to balance investment and affordability in our community. And I had an interesting question today from someone who has watched many budgets, if you can believe it or not. They asked me, what does a yes or a no vote mean when you adopt the budget? And it was kind of a difficult question to answer, and I think it's changed now that we have strong mayor powers to a degree as well. And I understand that we all have our own reasons that we may vote yes or no to adopt the budget at the end of the day. And you may find yourself in one ledger in the newspaper tomorrow or the other for a yes or a no vote. But I would argue that is less meaningful than the work that you do through this budget process. So for those that watch the budget, those that watch our council meetings, the work that we do during that budget deliberation, the work that we do every Monday night, the consistency of those decisions is much more meaningful than a symbolic vote at the end of this process. So I hope that that's reflected in the public, that they appreciate those that have come so prepared and worked so hard in this process, and that we respect the efforts that each one of us have brought here over these last couple of nights and throughout the year. So with that, again, thank you to everyone for your input. Thank you to the public that is watching and is here tonight, and thank you to all the staff that have worked so hard over the past few months. With that, I will call the vote.
Councillor Bondi?
No.
All votes are in. Motion passes 13-5.
And with that, I will switch chairs with Mayor Caniff as we move to a council meeting.
Madam Clerk, do we have the motion that we need to deal with? I don't.
Yes, we're just reopening the meeting to a
Perfect.
council meeting now, and Meredith will get it on the screen. Meredith, can we have the other one first with regards to the reserve policy? Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Harrigan and Councillor Anderson, can I get you to move this, please?
Happy to do so, Mayor Caniff.
And I'm happy to second.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
Councillor Bondi? All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Councillor Harrigan and Councillor Anderson, can I get you to move this, please?
Absolutely, Mayor Caniff. Happy to move this.
I am happy to second it.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
Councillor Bondi?
No.
All votes are in. Motion passes 12-6. Motion to adjourn?
Yes. With that, I just want to say a couple comments. I'll repeat what Councilor McGregor said. Thank you for everybody. It's been a long process, and I think we balanced strategic community needs with the current requirements. And I would like to say as well, I don't want to keep you in suspense that I will not be objecting and changing the budget from 4.99. So don't lose any sleep over it, all right? Councillor Scott, did you have a comment?
Just
question?
one quick comment. It was thank you for acknowledging the budget team, but I think this is a perfect time to also acknowledge that we do actually have an award-winning budget team here as well. So that we have a very prestigious, and we're very lucky to have a great budget team. And I think during open meetings when the awards are probably announced or presented, it's not as acknowledged as it would be during this time. So I wanted to thank Steve and his team and Gordon and his team for all they've done, not just through this process, but in the last several years to try to be as efficient as possible.
With that, can I get a motion to adjourn? Councillor Finn, seconded by Councillor B. McGregor. Anyone opposed? Consider us done at 7 something. Thanks, everyone.